Have you ever felt truly seen by something that doesn't speak your language? It was October 17th. Always October 17th. The air in the small, cluttered backyard held that peculiar crispness only late autumn brings, sharp enough to sting your cheeks, yet carrying the damp, earthy smell of fallen leaves slowly surrendering to decay. Late afternoon sun, weak and pale gold, slanted through the skeletal branches of the old maple tree, casting long dancing shadows across the patchy grass. Inside the worn vinyl siding of the bungalow, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, steam fogging the glass where her breath met the cold pane. Her reflection was a ghost, pale, eyes shadowed, holding a chipped mug of tea that had long gone cold. She traced the condensation with a fingertip. 3 years. 3 years since the phone. Call that shattered everything. 3 years since husband became late husband. 3 years of navigating the terrifying, exhilarating, exhausting labyrinth of single motherhood to a whirlwind named Chloe. The ache wasn't the sharp stab of fresh grief anymore. It was a deep, hollow thrumming, a constant low-grade hum of absence that vibrated through every room, every quiet moment. Especially on October 17th, Mark's birthday, the day the universe felt tilted. Chloe, a blur of pink overalls and tangled blonde curls, was a small, fierce counterpoint to the heavy silence. She babbled happily to herself on the worn living room rug, stacking colorful blocks only to gleefully knock them down again. Her laughter was a bright, fragile bell in the stillness, a sound Sarah clung to even as guilt pricked her. Was she enough? Could she ever be the anchor this vibrant little soul needed? The loneliness wasn't just about missing Mark. It was the terrifying weight of being the only one now. The sole keeper of memories, the sole protector, the sole everything. And then there was Oliver. He wasn't hers, not really. Not at first. He'd just appeared, like a dusty shadow blown in by the autumn wind. Sarah first spotted him 3 weeks ago, a huddled shape beneath the overgrown lilac bush at the edge of the yard. A big, rangy tabby, his fur a patchwork of browns, blacks, and grays, thick and slightly matted. Not feral exactly, but wary, world-weary. He'd watch the house, watch Chloe playing near the back steps, with an unnerving stillness. Not the stillness of sleep, but of intense observation. His eyes, a startling ancient shade of amber, seemed to miss nothing. He had a scar, a thin, pale line slicing diagonally through the fur just above his left eye, a badge from some forgotten skirmish. It gave him a perpetually quizzical, slightly skeptical expression. He never meowed for food, not like the neighborhood strays Sarah occasionally tossed scraps to. He'd just sit, silently, patiently, watching the back door. There was something unnerving about that silence, a deep, wordless presence that felt heavier than mere hunger. Sarah, her heart still a raw, tender thing, felt an unexpected kinship with that watchful stillness. He looked displaced, like something vital had been knocked loose in his world too. She'd started leaving a small bowl of kibble and fresh water just outside the back door, late in the evening, after Chloe was asleep. She'd catch glimpses of him in the pre-dawn gloom, a dark shape materializing from the bushes, eating with a deliberate, almost furtive speed, then vanishing again before the sun properly rose. He never lingered, never acknowledged her if she peeked through the curtain. It was a transaction, silent, detached, yet she found herself looking for him each morning. That silent, scarred watcher became part of the fragile rhythm of her days, a small, wild counterpoint to her contained grief and relentless routine. You're here listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world. One chilly afternoon, the wind picking up, whipping dead. Leaves into miniature cyclones across the yard, Sarah bundled Chloe into her puffy jacket for some fresh air. Really, just a desperate attempt to dispel the heavy silence pressing down on the house. Chloe toddled unsteadily on the uneven grass, chasing a particularly persistent leaf. Sarah sank onto the top step of the back porch, pulling her own thin cardigan tighter, watching her daughter with that familiar cocktail of love and bone-deep exhaustion. Oliver was there, not under the lilac bush, but closer. He sat perfectly, still beside the rusted wheelbarrow, maybe 10 feet from Chloe. He wasn't watching Sarah. His entire focus, that intense amber gaze, was fixed solely on the little girl. Not threateningly, not with predatory intent. It was protective, possessive almost, as if Chloe were his charge, his small pink responsibility. His ears were pricked forward, every muscle taut yet relaxed, ready. Sarah felt a strange prickle run up her spine. It wasn't fear, it was recognition, the deep, silent vigilance of someone or something standing guard. Chloe, oblivious, squealed with delight as the leaf finally landed near Oliver's paws. She took a wobbly step towards him. Oliver didn't flinch, didn't retreat. He just watched her, closer now. Sarah held her breath, instinctively ready to intervene, though she felt no immediate danger from the cat. Chloe reached out a chubby hand, fingers splayed, aiming not for the leaf, but for Oliver's head. Sarah tensed. "Chloe, gentle," she murmured, half rising. Oliver did something remarkable. He didn't hiss, he didn't swat, he didn't even move away. He slowly, deliberately lowered his head, just a fraction, closing those ancient amber eyes for a long, slow blink. A cat's kiss, an offering of trust. Chloe's fingers brushed the thick fur between his ears. Oliver held perfectly still for a heartbeat, 2. Then, with infinite grace, he turned his head slightly, bumped his cheek gently against her, small knuckles. A silent, velvet nudge, before melting backwards, soundless as smoke, disappearing into the deepening shadows beneath the porch. Chloe giggled, holding her hand up to Sarah. "Kitty soft, Mama." Sarah sank back onto the step, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She stared at the spot where the tabby had vanished, the cold step beneath her, the biting, wind-pulling strands of hair across her face, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. It all felt suddenly sharper, clearer, that deliberate blink, that gentle nudge. It wasn't just tolerance. It felt like an acknowledgement, a silent pact sealed in the cold October twilight. What was it about that moment that felt so profoundly different? Was it the sheer unexpectedness of a scarred stray offering trust to a toddler? Or was it something deeper, a resonance Sarah couldn't yet name? She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, but not entirely from the cold. That hollow thrumming inside her, it hadn't vanished. But for the first time in a long, long while, it wasn't the only sound. There was a new note, faint, tentative, like the first chime of a distant bell. Something quiet had shifted, not just in the yard, but somewhere deep within the guarded chambers of her own weary heart. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that the silent tabby, Oliver, wasn't just passing through anymore. His watchful amber eyes had become part of their story. A story that, though she didn't know it yet, was hurtling towards. A moment of blinding terror and astonishing courage captured forever in the cold, unblinking eye of a security camera. The days after Oliver's deliberate nudge against Chloe's hand, they felt different, not dramatically transformed. Not overnight miracles, But the quality of the silence in the old bungalow shifted. It wasn't just the absence of Mark anymore. It was a silence filled with a new kind of watching, a presence. Oliver didn't suddenly become an indoor cat. He remained a creature of thresholds. He claimed the worn welcome mat just outside the back door as his own. Sarah would find him there in the mornings, curled tight against the cold, a rumbly purr vibrating the air when she'd carefully step over him to retrieve the newspaper. His amber eyes would open, watch her for a long moment, then slowly close again. A silent acknowledgement. A truce. He started allowing Chloe closer. Not petting, not yet. But he'd sit, statue still, on the bottom porch step while Chloe sat. 2 steps above him, meticulously lining up pebbles she'd collected. She'd chatter away, nonsensical toddler monologues about clouds shaped like dinosaurs and the important business of digging holes. Oliver would listen, truly listen. His ears would twitch towards her voice, his gaze fixed not on her, but with her, on her pebbles, on the patch of dirt she was investigating. It was a shared focus, a quiet companionship Sarah hadn't seen him offer anyone else. Inside, the house still held its ghosts. Mark's faded plaid shirt still hung on the hook by the door, smelling faintly of sawdust and Old Spice. Sarah couldn't bring herself to move it. His toolbox sat untouched in the garage, a layer of dust settling over the well-worn handles. Chloe's room, painted a cheerful yellow before she was born, held a framed picture on the dresser. Mark, grinning broadly, holding a newborn Chloe, his eyes wide with terrified, overwhelming love. Sarah avoided looking at it directly. The gaping hole he left wasn't just in the bed beside her at night. It was in the knowing glances across the dinner table, the shared jokes over burnt toast, the silent solidarity during Chloe's epic tantrums. She was drowning in the doing, the meals, the laundry, the daycare drop-offs, the constant vigilance, but achingly alone in the being. The weight of being the sole keeper of memories, the sole interpreter of Chloe's world for Mark. It was a crushing, invisible burden. Oliver, somehow, seemed attuned to the invisible currents of grief in the house. Sarah noticed it first, late one night. Chloe had been fractious, fighting sleep, her cries echoing the hollow ache Sarah felt inside. Finally settled, Sarah sat slumped on the living room couch, a cold cup of tea forgotten on the coffee table, staring blankly at the flickering, silent television. The loneliness was a physical pressure, a cold stone in her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, the worn fabric of her sweater scratchy against her skin. The only sound, the relentless ticking of the kitchen clock, measuring out the empty seconds, a soft thump at the sliding glass door. She startled. Oliver was there, a silhouette against the moonlit yard, his breath fogging the glass. He pawed gently, silently at the door, not demanding, just present. Sarah, moved by an impulse she didn't fully understand, got up and slid the door, open a few inches. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and frost. Oliver didn't bolt inside. He stood on the threshold, looking up at her, those amber eyes catching the dim light from the TV. He blinked slowly. Once, twice. Then with deliberate care, he stepped just inside, onto the worn rug. He sat down, facing her, not venturing further. He simply watched. His presence wasn't demanding attention. It was offering a silent anchor in the vast sea of her solitude. Sarah sank back onto the couch. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But the ticking clock wasn't the only sound anymore. She could hear the soft rasp of his breathing, the faint rustle of his thick fur as he shifted slightly. The crushing loneliness didn't vanish, but it receded, just a fraction, held at bay by the quiet vigil of a scarred tabby on a rug. If this gentle story brought even a tiny smile or calm to your heart, would you consider subscribing? It helps me keep sharing these soft moments for you and for anyone who needs peace tonight. The trust grew, slowly, like moss on a stone. Oliver began venturing further inside, always on Chloe's heels. He'd appear silently in the doorway of her room during nap time, a shadow settling just outside the pool of sunlight, on the carpet. He'd watch Sarah read bedtime stories from the far corner of Chloe's room, his eyes reflecting the dim glow of the nightlight. He developed routines. He'd be waiting by the back door when Sarah brought Chloe home from daycare, his tail giving a single, slow twitch of greeting. He started eating the kibble Sarah put out while she was still in the kitchen, his back turned. To her, a sign of profound, hard-won trust in the feline world. He'd eat quickly, efficiently, then retreat to his mat, meticulously cleaning a paw, always keeping one eye on Chloe as she babbled about her day. Sarah began to learn his language. The slow blink, pure contentment, or reassurance. The single questioning "MRP" when he entered a room where Chloe was playing. The low, rumbling purr that vibrated the floorboards when he settled near the heating vent. The subtle flattening of his ears and the tense stillness that meant the neighbor's boisterous Labrador was passing the fence. He was fiercely observant, this cat. He mapped the rhythms of their small world, the clatter of breakfast dishes, the squeak of Chloe's favorite toy, the specific sigh Sarah made when exhaustion truly hit. He responded to them, not with overt affection, but with a deep, silent attentiveness. One rainy Tuesday, the gloom pressing against the windows, Sarah felt the weight of it all descend with unusual force. It was the anniversary of Mark's diagnosis, a day forever stained with the sterile smell of hospitals and the terrifying fragility of hope. Chloe, sensing her mother's tension, was clingy and whiny, amplifying Sarah's frayed nerves. She managed bath time, a battle of wills and splashes, and finally got Chloe into pajamas. As she carried her damp, wriggling daughter towards the bedroom, she passed the hallway closet. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, tucked behind winter coats, she caught a glimpse of Mark's old hiking boots. Dusty, unmoving, a punch to the gut. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall, a choked sob escaping her before she could clamp it down. Tears blurred her vision. Chloe, startled, began to cry in earnest. Sarah sank to the floor right there in the hallway, back against the wall, clutching Chloe to her chest, both of them crying. Chloe from confusion and overstimulation, Sarah from a grief that felt as raw and fresh as the day the earth had swallowed Mark whole. The sound of their shared weeping filled the narrow space. The rain lashed against the windows. Then, warmth. A soft pressure against Sarah's thigh. She looked down, blinking through tears. Oliver was there. He hadn't made a sound. He must have followed them from the bathroom. He wasn't looking at her face. He was pressed firmly against her leg, his side radiating heat through her thin pajama pants. He didn't purr. He didn't meow. He simply leaned, pushed his solid weight against her trembling leg, anchoring her. His head was turned slightly, his gaze fixed down the hallway, as if standing guard against the shadows, against the memories threatening to overwhelm her in this vulnerable moment. He stayed like that, a warm, silent bulwark, until Chloe's cries subsided into hiccups against Sarah's shoulder, and Sarah's own ragged breathing began to even out. The rain drummed on. The hallway light felt too bright. But Oliver's steady pressure, his quiet, immovable presence, it was a lifeline thrown across a chasm she thought would swallow her. He wasn't comforting Chloe. He was comforting her, seeing her unraveling. Later, when Chloe was finally asleep, Sarah crept back into the hallway. Oliver was still there, sitting where she'd left him, grooming a paw with fastidious care. As She approached, he paused, looked up at her, and deliberately, slowly, blinked. Sarah knelt down. Hesitantly, she reached out a hand. Oliver didn't retreat. He allowed her fingers to brush the thick fur along his spine, right over the slightly raised ridge of an old scar she hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath his fur. He closed his eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into the touch. His fur was surprisingly soft beneath the coarse guard hairs, warm from his body heat. She could feel the vibration start deep in his chest, not a full purr, but a low, contented rumble. She smelled the rain on his fur, the faint, clean scent of cat, and underneath it all, the lingering damp earth smell of autumn. It was a grounding sensory moment. Real, tangible. Did he understand her grief? Sarah didn't know, but he'd recognized the shape of it, the posture of despair, and he'd responded with the only language he had: silent presence, unwavering, vigilance, and the simple, profound gift of warmth pressed against a breaking point. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Sarah didn't feel entirely alone in carrying the weight. There was another soul in the house, scarred and silent, who seemed to understand the contours of the void and chose to stand beside her at its edge. The bond wasn't spoken. It was woven in shared silences, in amber glances, in the soft pressure of fur against skin in the dark. It was a fragile, growing thing, and it was about to face its first, unexpected test. Winter settled. Over the bungalow like a heavy gray blanket, the vibrant autumn leaves were gone, replaced by skeletal branches scratching against the leaden sky. Inside, however, a fragile warmth had taken root. Oliver's presence was no longer just felt at the threshold. He had become a quiet constant within the walls. He claimed the faded armchair by the living room radiator as his throne, a spot offering both warmth and a commanding view of Chloe's play area. He'd sleep there for hours, a soft, rumbling engine of contentment, only stirring when Chloe's laughter reached a certain pitch, or when Sarah sighed a little too deeply over bills at the kitchen table. The routines deepened. Oliver met Chloe at the door after daycare without fail. He'd developed a peculiar habit of escorting her to the bathroom at bath time, sitting sentinel outside the closed door, his tail twitching rhythmically against the floorboards. He'd appear silently beside Sarah's feet while she washed dishes, a solid, warm weight leaning against her ankles. At night, he'd often curl at the foot of Sarah's bed, a shadowy lump radiating quiet comfort. The deep, hollow thrumming inside Sarah hadn't vanished, but Oliver's steady presence acted like a baffle, softening its edges, making the silence less desolate. He was becoming theirs, hers, a silent, furry pillar in the architecture of their healing. But Oliver's watchfulness, Sarah began to notice, wasn't always passive. It held a sharp, almost anxious edge under certain circumstances. The trigger arrived every weekday afternoon, punctual as clockwork, and its name was Rex. Rex belonged to the new neighbors, the Millers, who had moved into the house directly behind Sarah's backyard just before the first snow. Rex was a young German Shepherd mix, enormous, bursting with poorly channeled energy, and possessing a bark that could shatter glass. Mr. Miller, seemingly oblivious or indifferent, would let Rex out into their fenced backyard around 3:30 p.m. The dog would explode into the space, barking incessantly at squirrels, birds, falling leaves, his own shadow, and, most alarmingly, at the chain-link fence separating his yard from Sarah's. The first time Rex charged the fence, barking furiously, Chloe had been playing near the back steps with her plastic tea set. The sudden explosive sound scared her so badly she dropped her tiny cup and ran screaming into Sarah's legs. Sarah scooped her up, heart hammering, glaring at the lunging, slobbering beast just yards away. Oliver, who had been sunning himself near the porch, vanished. Sarah found him moments later inside, pressed flat beneath the couch, only the tip of his tail visible, rigid with tension. It was a reasonable reaction. Rex was terrifying. But Oliver's reaction evolved. He stopped hiding. Instead, whenever Rex's afternoon outburst began, Oliver would materialize. He wouldn't run towards the fence. He wouldn't hiss or yowl. He'd simply appear, usually on the back porch railing or sometimes sitting utterly still on the top step. He'd face the source of the noise, his body low to the ground, muscles coiled beneath his thick winter coat. His amber eyes wouldn't blink. They'd fix on the frenzied dog with an unnerving intensity. His ears would flatten slightly, not in fear, Sarah realized, but in concentration. Focus. He'd track Rex's chaotic movements with a predator's stillness, his tail a rigid low line behind him. The rumbling purr was absent. In its place was a silence so profound it seemed to absorb the dog's noise. Every new subscriber is like a warm cup of tea to my soul. It keeps this little channel going. If you felt something from this story, I'd love for you to stay. He started positioning himself between Chloe and the fence whenever she was outside and Rex was loose. If Chloe wandered towards the lilac bush, Oliver would subtly shift, placing his body in her path, gently nudging her back towards the porch with his head, all while keeping his eyes locked on the barking dog. It wasn't aggressive. It was strategic, protective. Sarah tried talking to Mr. Miller, a gruff man who waved her off with a, "He's just playing, all bark, no bite." But Sarah saw the way Rex strained against the chain link, teeth bared, eyes rolling with overstimulation. She saw the way Oliver's scar, that pale line above his eye, seemed to whiten with tension during these episodes. One bitterly cold afternoon, the ground hard with frost, Sarah was hanging laundry on the line, the damp sheets snapping stiffly in the wind. Chloe, bundled in her snowsuit like a tiny pink marshmallow, was attempting to make a snow angel on the small patch of grass not covered by the porch's shadow. Oliver was nearby, sitting with his back to the house, seemingly dozing in a thin shaft of weak sunlight. Right on schedule, the Miller's back door slammed. Rex burst forth, a black and tan missile heading straight for the fence line closest to Chloe. His barking was ferocious, a barrage of sound that made Sarah jump, dropping a clothespin. Rex hurled himself against the chain link, rattling the entire section. Chloe froze mid-snow angel, her small face crumpling in terror, a high-pitched whimper escaping her lips. Oliver moved, not with the lightning speed Sarah would later see, but with a terrifyingly deliberate purpose. He was on his feet in an instant, silent as smoke. He didn't run away from the noise. He moved towards it. He placed himself directly in front of Chloe, facing the fence maybe 5 feet from the lunging dog. He didn't crouch defensively. He stood tall, legs braced, his thick tail held low but rigid. His fur, normally smooth, stood up along his spine and shoulders, making him look suddenly larger, more formidable. He didn't hiss. He didn't yowl. He opened his mouth slightly and emitted a sound Sarah had never heard from him before. A low, guttural, rumbling growl that vibrated in the frigid air. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic like Rex's barking. It was deep, resonant, and utterly chilling. A primal warning that cut through the shepherd's cacophony like a knife. Rex, mid-lunge, faltered. He stopped barking for a split second, his head cocked, confused by this small, silent creature that suddenly wasn't running, wasn't hiding, but was challenging him with such unnerving stillness and that bone-deep growl. He recovered quickly, renewing his barking with even more frenzy, slamming against the fence again. But he didn't come closer to the barrier where Oliver stood, immovable as a small, furred statue between the dog and the trembling child. Sarah rushed forward, scooping Chloe up, her own heart pounding against her ribs. "Shh, baby. It's okay. Mama's got you," she murmured, holding Chloe tight, her eyes fixed on Oliver. He didn't look back at her. His entire being was focused on Rex. The growl continued, a steady, threatening rumble emanating from his chest. The wind whipped at his thick fur, but he didn't flinch. He held his ground until Mr. Miller, finally drawn by the prolonged noise, yelled from his back door, "Rex, inside, now!" The dog, with a final frustrated bark, reluctantly turned and bounded back towards the house. Only then did Oliver relax. The ridge of fur along his spine smoothed down. The low growl ceased. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, to look at Sarah and Chloe. His amber eyes met Sarah's. No triumph, no fear, just a deep, unwavering certainty. He blinked slowly. Once. Then he padded silently back towards the porch as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He jumped onto his mat, curled up, and closed his eyes. The picture of feline nonchalance, though Sarah could still see the rapid pulse beating in the thin skin of his throat. Sarah stood frozen in the cold yard, Chloe's muffled sobs against her neck, staring at the cat. The quiet, scarred observer who shared her grief had just revealed a different facet, a fierce, unflinching protector. That low growl, that deliberate placement. It wasn't just instinct. It felt like intent. He hadn't just reacted to a threat. He had assessed it, confronted it, and deterred it. All for Chloe. What did Oliver know about Rex that she didn't? Was it just the dog's unpredictable energy? Or had Oliver sensed something darker, something more dangerous lurking beneath the just playing facade? The easy rhythm of their days felt fractured. The backyard, once a safe haven for Chloe's play, now felt tinged with an unseen menace every afternoon, and Oliver's vigilance had shifted from quiet observation to active, silent defense. The tension wasn't just outside the fence anymore. It had seeped into Sarah's bones. Trust in Oliver's instincts warred with a gnawing fear of what Rex might be capable of if that fence ever failed. The fragile peace they'd built felt suddenly terrifyingly fragile. The silent tabby's amber gaze now held a warning Sarah couldn't ignore, and the shadow of the big dog next door stretched long and cold over their quiet world. The stage was set, not for a skirmish, but for a collision. Winter deepened, its grip. Snow, thick and muffling, blanketed the small backyard, transforming the chain-link fence into a ghostly lattice. The pristine white should have felt peaceful, serene. Instead, it amplified the dread that coiled in Sarah's stomach. Every afternoon, 3:30 p.m., Rex o'clock, the pristine snow couldn't mask the deep gouges and muddy splatters where the frantic dog hurled himself against the barrier day after day. Oliver's vigilance became a ritual as predictable as the dog's outbursts. The moment the Millers' back door slammed, Oliver would materialize. No longer just on the porch, he'd position himself like a small, furred sentinel in the snow, midway between the back steps and the fence line, facing the point where Rex always charged. He'd sit utterly still, a stark silhouette against the white amber eyes fixed, unblinking, on the frenzied spectacle. The low growl was now a constant counterpoint to Rex's barking during these episodes, a primal bass note vibrating beneath, the shepherd's shrill cacophony. Sarah watched, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs, torn between awe at Oliver's unwavering defense and a terror that gnawed at her resolve. She called animal control again. She left another note for Mr. Miller, her handwriting shaky with suppressed anger. Silence. Rex's aggression seemed to escalate, fueled by Oliver's defiance. The dog would slam harder against the rattling chain link, his barks taking on a sharper, more frustrated edge, saliva freezing on the metal wires. The tension bled into the house. Chloe became clingier, flinching at loud noises, asking repeatedly, "Doggy mean, Mama?" Sarah's sleep fractured, plagued by dreams of splintering wood and snarling teeth. The fragile peace Oliver had helped. Weave felt stretched thin, ready to snap. She found herself watching the cat constantly, reading the subtle shifts in his posture, the tension in his scarred brow. He was always on. Even curled by the radiator, one ear remained perpetually swiveled towards the back of the house. His purrs were rarer, shorter. The weight of his silent guardianship was palpable. Then came the thaw, a deceptive gift. Warmer. Air crept in, carrying the promise of spring, but it turned the snow to treacherous slush and mud. The ground became unstable, slick. The chain-link fence, stressed by weeks of Rex's assaults and the freeze-thaw cycle, groaned ominously in the wind. Sarah avoided the backyard entirely with Chloe, keeping playtime confined to the living room rug, much to her daughter's frustrated dismay. The atmosphere inside grew thick with unspoken fear. March 12th, a Thursday. The afternoon sun was surprisingly strong, melting the last stubborn patches of snow, revealing the muddy, ravaged earth beneath. Sarah was in the kitchen, attempting to focus on chopping vegetables for soup, the rhythmic thunk of the knife a desperate anchor. Chloe was playing quietly near the sliding glass door with her wooden blocks, building a precarious tower. Oliver was a dark shape on the porch mat, soaking in the weak sun, his eyes closed, though Sarah knew he wasn't truly asleep. His ears were too alert, the tips twitching minutely. The slam of the miller's door was like a gunshot. Sarah froze, knife hovering over a carrot. Rex's explosive barking ripped through the fragile afternoon calm. She heard the frantic scrabbling of claws on the wet ground, the furious rattling of the fence. It sounded louder, closer, more desperate. Chloe, startled by the sudden noise, dropped a block. It rolled towards the sliding glass door. Without thinking, drawn by the bright sun and the familiar trajectory of her toy, she toddled the few steps to the door. Her small hand, sticky from a forgotten cracker, pressed flat against the cold glass as she peered out, searching for her block in the mud near the edge of the porch. "Chloe, no! Back up, sweetie!" Sarah's voice was sharp, laced with panic. She dropped the knife, lunging towards the living room, but it was too late. The sound was sickening, a sharp metallic crack, followed by a tearing, grinding screech. Not the usual rattle. This was structural failure. Sarah saw it through the glass, a nightmare unfolding in horrifying slow motion. The section of fence where Rex habitually charged, it buckled. The bottom post, rotted by damp and relentless pressure, snapped at its base. The chain link sagged violently inward, creating a jagged, gaping V, just wide enough. Rex, driven by months of frustrated aggression and the sudden collapse of his barrier, didn't hesitate. A black and tan blur, fueled by pent-up fury and the sight of the small figure silhouetted against the glass, he surged through the breach. Mud flew from his paws. His barking ceased, replaced by a terrifying, focused silence as he charged straight for Chloe. Time stopped. Sarah's scream tore from her throat, raw and primal, but it felt distant, muffled. She was moving, stumbling, her legs leaden, knowing she wouldn't reach her daughter in time. Chloe turned, her eyes wide with innocent confusion, just beginning to register the massive shape hurtling towards her. Then, Oliver. He moved with a speed that defied comprehension. One moment, a dark shape on the mat. The next, an orange and brown. Missile launched from the porch. He didn't run around the chaos. He flew through it. A low, guttural yowl, unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, a sound ripped from the very core of instinct and fury, split the air as he intercepted Rex's trajectory. He didn't aim for the dog's flank. He went for the face, a leap born of pure, desperate courage. He launched himself up, claws extended, a whirlwind of fur and fury, landing squarely on Rex's broad muzzle, claws digging deep, teeth flashing in a savage bite aimed at the sensitive nose. Rex, caught mid-stride, blinded and shocked by the sudden painful assault from a creature he'd considered insignificant prey, let out a high-pitched yelp of surprise and pain. His charge faltered. He stumbled, shaking his massive head violently, trying to dislodge the clinging, spitting fury attached to his face. Oliver held on for a single, eternal second, a small, fierce demon anchored by claws and teeth. It was just enough. Just enough. Distraction. Just enough time. Sarah crashed into Chloe, sweeping her up into her arms, spinning away from the snarling, shaking maelstrom just feet away. She stumbled backwards, falling hard onto the porch steps, clutching Chloe to her chest, shielding her with her own body. She could feel Chloe's tiny heart hammering against her own, feel the child's terrified whimpers muffled against her neck. Rex, finally shaking Oliver loose, whipped his head around, disoriented, pain and rage warring in his eyes. He saw Sarah, and Chloe huddled on the steps. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest. He took a step towards them, mud dripping from his jaws. Oliver hit the muddy ground hard, rolling, but he was up instantly. He didn't retreat. He didn't cower. Blood matted the fur on his shoulder. Rex's teeth had found purchase as he shook him off. But Oliver planted himself firmly between the dog and his family. He was a mess, mud splattered, fur standing on end, blood stark against his tabby stripes. But he stood tall, legs braced, back arched, tail puffed to twice its size. He faced the much larger predator, and he screamed. A raw, ragged, ear-splitting sound of pure defiance. It wasn't fear. It was a challenge, a promise of utter, self-destructive resistance if Rex took one more step. Rex hesitated. The small creature he'd easily flung aside was back, wounded but radiating a terrifying, unbreakable will. The blood on Oliver's fur, the sheer ferocity of his stance, it gave the bigger animal pause. He took a half-step back, growling, uncertainly. The moment stretched, brittle as ice. Then, salvation. Mr. Miller's bellow, thick with shock, cut through the yard. "Rex, no! Get back here!" He was running, face ashen, finally witnessing the consequences of his neglect. Rex, confused by the pain, the defiance, and his owner's shout, turned and slunk back towards the broken fence, casting one last bewildered look at the small, bloodied fury still screaming defiance from the mud. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by Chloe's shuddering sobs and Sarah's own ragged gasps for air. She clung to her daughter, trembling violently, her eyes fixed on Oliver. He stood there for another heartbeat, trembling from nose to tail tip, still facing the direction Rex had gone, his sides heaving. Then, slowly, the tension bled out of him. The puffed fur settled. His rigid stance softened. He turned slowly, deliberately, his amber eyes finding Sarah's. They held no triumph, only a profound exhaustion and a deep, unwavering question. Are they safe? He took a step towards the porch. Then another. His gait was unsteady, favoring his injured shoulder. He reached the bottom step where Sarah sat, frozen, clutching Chloe. He didn't try to climb up. He stopped, looked up at her. Then, with infinite care, he stretched his neck forward and gently, ever so gently, pressed the top of his head against Sarah's muddy hand where it rested on Chloe's back. A soft, questioning nudge, a silent check-in. A sob tore from Sarah's throat. Not of fear this time, but of overwhelming, shattering awe. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and buried them in the thick, muddy fur behind his ears. She could feel the rapid, frantic beat of his heart beneath her palm, the warmth of his body, the slight stickiness of blood. He leaned into her, touch, closing his eyes, a faint, thrumming purr starting deep in his chest. A fragile sound, born of pain and utter exhaustion, but unmistakable. Relief. Connection. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're listening alone, tonight, know I made this story for you. Subscribe if you want more comfort like this. The world rushed back in, the sound of Mr. Miller shouting at Rex, the distant wail of a siren, a neighbor must have called. Chloe's cries softening into hiccups against her neck. But Sarah only had eyes for the cat, the scarred, silent stray who had become their guardian, who had seen the threat they couldn't fully grasp, who had placed his small, vulnerable body between a beast and a child without a moment's hesitation, who had fought with the ferocity of a lion, and now leaned, trembling and bleeding, against her hand, seeking only the reassurance that his charges were unharmed. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, mingling with the mud on her cheeks. She pressed her forehead against Oliver's, breathing in the scent of wet fur, earth, and the faint coppery tang of blood. "Oh, Oliver," she whispered, her voice thick with tears and a love so fierce it stole her breath. "Oh, my brave, brave boy." The breaking point had come, the fence had failed, the terror had been unleashed, but so had something else, something luminous and unbreakable. In the muddy aftermath, amidst the shock and the sirens, Sarah cradled her daughter and her cat, the boundary between them dissolving in the shared heat of survival, in the silent, blood-stained language of sacrifice and love. The quiet tabbies, secret vigil had erupted into blinding, heroic action, and the unblinking eye of the security camera Sarah had installed just last week, pointed squarely at the back porch, had captured every single astonishing second. The fluorescent lights of the emergency vet clinic hummed with a sterile, unforgiving brightness. The air smelled sharply of antiseptic, bleach, and the underlying, faintly metallic scent of animal fear. Sarah sat hunched on a hard plastic chair, Chloe asleep in her lap, tear tracks dried on her flushed cheeks. Sarah's own clothes were stiff with dried mud and speckled with rusty brown stains, Oliver's blood. She cradled her daughter, but her eyes were glued to the closed door marked treatment area. Every nerve ending felt scraped raw. The images played on a relentless loop behind her eyelids. The fence buckling, the black and tan blur, Oliver's impossible leap, the sickening thud as Rex shook him off, the small bloodied body standing, defiant in the mud. A young vet tech emerged, her scrubs crisp, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah's heart lurched into her throat. "Ms. Evans! Oliver's stable!" The words hit her like a physical blow, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred her vision. "Stable?" she managed, her voice raspy. The tech nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "He's a tough little guy. He's got some deep puncture wounds on his shoulder and flank and significant bruising. We've cleaned him up, stitched the worst of it, started him on antibiotics and pain medication. He's pretty groggy right now. The main concern is preventing infection and keeping him quiet so he can heal. He lost some blood, but not critically. We'd like to keep him overnight for observation, just to be safe." Sarah nodded mutely, relief warring with the visceral memory of Oliver's blood on her hands. Can I see him? Just for a second?" The tech led her into a dimly lit recovery area. Oliver lay on a soft blanket in a large metal cage, an IV line taped to his front leg. He looked impossibly small and fragile beneath the harsh light. His fur was shaved in patches around the bandages wrapped tightly around his shoulder and side, revealing the angry red puncture marks beneath. His breathing was shallow but steady. The familiar scar above his eye stood out starkly against his pale, shaved skin. He was deeply asleep, the pain medication pulling him under. Sarah knelt beside the cage, her fingers curling around the cold, metal bars. Chloe stirred in her arms, blinking sleepily. "I'll wiver," she murmured. "He's sleeping, baby," Sarah whispered, her voice thick. He's going to be okay." Saying the words aloud felt like an act of desperate faith. Seeing him like this, vulnerable and bandaged, undid her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the chaos, the frantic drive to the vet, the bureaucratic haze of giving statements to the police and animal control officers, it all drained. away, leaving behind a profound, trembling exhaustion and a wave of guilt so intense it stole her breath. She had installed the security camera. She had captured the terrifying, heroic seconds. And now that footage, raw, visceral, showing Oliver's sacrifice in brutal clarity, was everywhere. Every new subscriber is like a warm cup of tea to my soul. It keeps this little channel going. If you felt something from this story, I'd love for you to stay. While Oliver fought for his life in surgery, the video had exploded. A neighbor, hearing the commotion and seeing the broken fence, had called 911. The responding officer, securing the scene, had noticed the small security camera mounted under the porch eave. With Sarah's shell-shocked permission, he'd reviewed the footage. His stunned reaction, muttering "holy" into his radio, had been the spark. By the time Sarah was giving her statement at the police station, her phone, silenced in her pocket, was vibrating incessantly. Local news outlets, national networks, online animal pages, the clip of the tabby launching himself at the charging dog, shielding the toddler, was viral. Hero cat saves child. Tara 2.0, incredible. Feline bravery caught on tape, the headlines screamed. Her quiet street was now lined with news vans. Strangers called, emailed, messaged, demanding interviews, offering donations, wanting to see the hero cat. Sarah felt violated. The most terrifying, intimate moment of her life, the moment her child's life hung in the balance, the moment Oliver nearly gave his own, had been commodified, reduced to a sensational loop on the evening news. She'd turned off her phone, barricaded the doors, drawn the blinds. The world wanted a story. She just wanted silence. She just wanted her cat home. The next morning, Sarah brought Oliver home. The vet tech carried him out in a carrier, still groggy, wrapped in a soft blanket. Chloe, clutching Sarah's leg, whispered, "Ow, wiver, boo-boo." Her small face was pinched with worry. "Yes, sweetie," Sarah said softly, kneeling to Chloe's level. "Oliver has boo-boos, but he's very brave, and we're going to help him feel better, okay? We have to be very gentle." Chloe nodded solemnly, her eyes wide. "Gentle," she repeated, as if memorizing a sacred word. Sarah had transformed a quiet corner of the living room into a recovery sanctuary, a soft nest of blankets in a large cardboard box near the radiator, away from drafts. She carefully lifted Oliver out of the carrier. He stirred, letting out a faint, pained mewl that tore at Sarah's heart. He felt lighter, bonier beneath the blanket. She settled him into the nest, arranging the blanket so he could see out. His amber eyes were clouded with drugs and pain, but they tracked her face. He blinked slowly, deliberately, a fragile echo of his old reassurance. Chloe approached with agonizing slowness, holding out her favorite stuffed bunny. She placed it carefully near Oliver's nose, not touching him. "Bunny soft," she whispered. Oliver's gaze shifted to the toy, then back to Chloe. His tail gave the faintest, weakest twitch against the blanket. Chloe beamed, a small, hesitant sun breaking through the worry. The routines resumed, but everything was different, softer, slower, infused with a new layer of care and a lingering shadow of fear. Rex was gone. Animal control had taken him immediately. The video evidence was undeniable. Mr. Miller, pale and shaken, had paid for Oliver's vet bills without question and promised a reinforced fence within the week. The physical threat was neutralized, but the emotional aftershocks rippled through their small world. Chloe had nightmares. She'd wake screaming, "Doggy! Bad doggy!" reaching frantically for Sarah. Oliver, despite his pain, would often stir in his box when Chloe cried, letting out a low, rumbling purr, a sound that seemed to cost him effort but was offered nonetheless. Sometimes Sarah would carry Chloe to his box, sitting on the floor beside it, letting Chloe see Oliver sleeping, hear his purr. The The small, wounded creature's presence was a tangible anchor against the invisible monsters of her dreams. Sarah moved through the days in a state of hypervigilance. Every creak of the house, every bark from farther down the street made her flinch. She checked the locks obsessively. She watched Chloe like a hawk. But she also watched Oliver with a new, profound intensity. Changing his bandages was a ritual of trembling hands and whispered apologies. She'd clean the wounds with saline, her touch feather-light, wincing as he tensed, a low groan escaping him. She'd administer his pain medication, coaxing the bitter liquid into his mouth, stroking his throat until he swallowed. She'd sit beside his box for hours, reading aloud to Chloe, her voice a steady murmur, her fingers often resting lightly on his unharmed side, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing, the faint thrum of his purr when the pain meds kicked in. The world outside clamored. News vans lingered for another day before moving on to the next sensation. Donations poured in, enough to cover the vet bills many times over. Sarah set up a small fund in Oliver's name at the local animal shelter, redirecting the overwhelming generosity. Interview requests piled up, ignored. She deleted the viral video from her own cloud storage. She didn't want the reminder. She didn't want the world's narrative. She only wanted theirs. One quiet afternoon, about a week after the attack, Oliver was resting in his box. The strong afternoon sun slanted across the floor, warming the worn rug. Chloe was napping. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor beside Oliver's sanctuary, sorting laundry. The only sounds were the rhythmic click of the radiator and Oliver's soft, steady breathing. She looked over at him. He was awake, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. He was watching her, not with his usual intense vigilance, but with a quiet, deep-seated calm. The bandages were smaller now, the wounds healing cleanly beneath. He stretched carefully, testing his injured shoulder, wincing slightly but managing to extend his front legs. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up. He stood, swayed, for a moment, then stepped gingerly out of the box and onto the soft rug. He took a few tentative steps, his gait stiff and awkward, favoring his bandaged side. He walked towards Sarah, not towards his food bowl, not towards the window, towards her. He stopped beside her folded legs. He looked up at her, those ancient amber eyes holding hers. Then, with infinite care, he lowered himself, not onto the rug beside her. He curled his body, carefully avoiding his injured side, and settled his head directly onto her thigh. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, the deepest sigh Sarah had ever heard from him, a sound of utter release, of profound exhaustion mingled with absolute trust. Then he closed his eyes. His purr started, low and thrumming, vibrating through her leg, warm and solid and real. Sarah froze, a pair of Chloe's tiny socks clutched in her hand. She looked down at the cat whose head rested on her leg. The cat, who had faced down a beast for her child. This simple act, choosing her lap as his place of rest, seeking her warmth and presence in his vulnerability, felt more monumental than any viral video, any news headline. It was a quiet surrender, a silent declaration. He wasn't just guarding them anymore. He was belonging. He was trusting her with his healing, just as he had trusted her with his silent grief months before. Tears welled, silent and warm, spilling down her cheeks. She didn't move, afraid to disturb him. She slowly lowered the sock, letting her hand rest gently on his head, her fingers tracing the familiar scar above his eye, then sinking into the thick, warm fur behind his ears. He leaned into the touch, his purr deepening, resonating through her bones. The weight of his head on her leg, the rumble vibrating through her, the soft rhythm of his breath. It anchored her in a way nothing else could. The hollow thrumming of grief was still there. The fear hadn't magically vanished. The world outside still felt too loud, too sharp. But here, in this patch of sunlight, with this small, scarred creature, trusting her enough to rest his wounded body on hers, Sarah felt a shift. The relentless doing softened. The crushing weight of being the only one, it lightened, just a fraction. She wasn't alone in the being anymore. Oliver shared it. He shared the quiet, the fear, the healing, the weight of memory. He had chosen them, fought for them, and now, in his brokenness, he sought solace with her. She looked at Mark's plaid shirt hanging on the hook. She looked at the picture of him holding baby Chloe on the dresser. The ache was still sharp, a familiar hollow in her chest. But it was no longer the only landscape. Oliver's head on her leg, his slow healing breaths, Chloe sleeping peacefully down the hall. This was the new ground. Scarred, yes, bruised, but fiercely, tenderly held. The silent Tabby hadn't just saved Chloe's life that day in the mud. In the quiet aftermath, bandaged and trusting, he was saving Sarah's too, stitch by fragile stitch. The question wasn't just how they would heal anymore, it was who they would be, together, on the other side of the terror. The answer, Sarah, realized, her fingers still buried in Oliver's warm fur, was slowly unfolding, purring softly in her lap. Spring arrived, not with a fanfare, but with a gentle insistence. The muddy scar in the backyard where the fence had failed slowly greened over. Mr. Miller, true to his word, had installed a towering solid wood fence, an impenetrable barrier that felt less like a neighborly divide and more like a fortress wall. The last of Oliver's bandages came off, revealing healing pink skin beneath the slowly regrowing fur, a stark map of courage etched onto his tabby frame. The stiffness in his gait eased, replaced by a cautious grace, though he still favored the shoulder when leaping onto his radiator throne. Life settled into a new rhythm, deeper and more resonant than before. The frantic energy of fear had dissipated, replaced by a profound, quiet gratitude that infused their days. Chloe's nightmares grew less frequent, fading like morning mist. When she did wake crying, it wasn't just Sarah who soothed her. Often, Oliver would be there first, having silently padded into her room. He'd jump onto her toddler bed, a maneuver that still cost him a slight wince, and curl himself against her small back, his rumbling purr a tangible lullaby in the dark. Sarah would find them like that, bathed in moonlight, Chloe's hand tangled, in Oliver's thick fur, both breathing in peaceful unison. The viral storm had truly passed. The news vans were distant memories. Sarah had politely but firmly declined all further interviews, redirecting the lingering interest towards the shelter. Fund established in Oliver's name. The quiet she craved had returned, but it was a different quiet now. It wasn't the hollow silence of grief, but a peaceful hum, filled with the sounds of Chloe's imaginative play, the rhythmic click of Oliver's claws on the hardwood as he patrolled his domain and the comforting bubble of the kettle on the stove. You're here, listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world. One warm Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, catching dust motes, dancing in the air. Sarah was washing breakfast dishes, the scent of soap and toast lingering. Chloe sat at her little table, meticulously drawing swirls of purple and green crayon on construction paper. Oliver was stretched out on the sun-warmed linoleum nearby, a patch of light highlighting the slightly uneven texture of his healing fur. He watched Chloe, his tail tip flicking lazily. "Look, Owl Weaver." Chloe held up her drawing, a chaotic burst of color. "Puppy! Nice puppy!" She pointed emphatically at a vaguely dog-shaped blob. Oliver, without rising, blinked slowly at her. Chloe beamed, interpreting this as rapt approval. She slid off her chair, clutching the drawing, and toddled over. to him. She knelt beside him, her face inches from his. "Nice puppy," she repeated softly, then added with startling clarity, "Not bad, doggy. Nice." Sarah froze, the dishcloth dripping in her hand. Chloe had been stringing words together, but this was a complete thought. A distinction, a processing of the trauma, framed in her own terms, offered directly to Oliver. It wasn't just mimicry, it was understanding, shared. Oliver didn't flinch. He lifted his head slightly and nudged Chloe's knee with his nose. A soft, affirmative murp vibrated in his throat. Chloe giggled, the sound pure and bright. She patted his head, gentle as always. "Good owl-wiver." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't the dramatic rescue replaying. It was this quiet exchange. Chloe finding her voice, not just to speak, but to articulate her world, her fears, her reassurances, and sharing it. Directly with the creature who had helped her feel safe enough to do so. Oliver's response wasn't heroics. It was simple, profound acknowledgement. His gift wasn't just saving her life, it was helping her reclaim her sense of safety, her voice. He had been the bridge between terror and trust. Later that week, a small, padded envelope arrived in the mail. The return address was unfamiliar, simply a name: E. Reynolds. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a collar. Not a flashy, sequined thing, but a beautiful hand-stitched leather collar in a rich, warm chestnut brown. It was soft, yet sturdy. Attached to it was a simple brass tag, engraved not with Oliver's name, but with a single word: Guardian. There was no note, just the collar. Sarah held it, running her thumb over the smooth leather, the cool metal of the tag. Guardian. It wasn't a label for the viral sensation, the hero cat. It was a recognition of his true, constant nature. The silent watcher under the lilac bush, the warm pressure against a breaking heart in a dark hallway, the unwavering presence between a child and perceived danger, the steady purr in the night. He hadn't just acted in one moment of crisis, he lived the role, every day. Sarah sat on the floor near Oliver's radiator throne. He was dozing, but opened one amber eye as she approached. She held up the collar. "Look what came for you, brave boy." Oliver stretched, yawned, and patted over. He sniffed the leather curiously, then nudged Sarah's hand with his head. An invitation, or perhaps an acceptance. With trembling fingers, Sarah unbuckled the simple breakaway collar he'd worn since his first vet visit months ago. She slid the new leather collar around his neck, adjusting the fit so it was snug but comfortable. The chestnut brown looked beautiful against his tabby fur, highlighting the warm undertones. The brass tag gleamed softly in the sunlight. Guardian. Oliver shook his head slightly, the new weight unfamiliar. He took a few steps, paused, then sat down and began meticulously grooming his shoulder, seemingly unfazed. But Sarah saw it. The way he held his head a fraction higher, the subtle shift in his posture. It wasn't arrogance, it was belonging. A visible marker of his place, his purpose, recognized and honored. Chloe spotted it immediately after her nap. "Ow-wiver pretty," she declared, pointing at the collar. She carefully touched the brass tag. "Guardian," she sounded out, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked from the tag to Oliver, then to Sarah. A slow, understanding smile spread across her face. "Ow-wiver home," she stated, with a simple, profound certainty that resonated deep in Sarah's bones. It wasn't a question. It was a truth Chloe felt in her very core. Oliver wasn't just in their home. He was home. A fundamental part of its safety, its warmth, its heartbeat. What small moment made you realize someone, or something, truly belonged in your life? Was it a word spoken, a gesture given, a quiet understanding that needed no explanation at all? The final gift wasn't a dramatic revelation, but a quiet accumulation of truths settling into place. It was Chloe finding her voice and offering it to Oliver. It was the anonymous arrival of the collar, a tangible acknowledgement of his silent, constant role. It was Chloe's simple declaration, "I'll wiver home." It was the way Oliver, sporting his new title, resumed his watchful perch on the back porch mat, surveying his kingdom, the sturdy fence, the greening grass, the little girl drawing pictures of nice puppies inside, with a deep, rumbling purr of utter contentment. He wasn't just guarding a place, he was inhabiting his purpose. He was home. And Sarah? Sarah found her own gift unfolding. The overwhelming response to Oliver's story, the redirected funds, had sparked something. She started volunteering at the shelter where she'd set up Oliver's fund. Not just writing checks, but hands-on. Cleaning cages, socializing shy cats, helping with adoptions. She discovered a knack for it, a calm patience, an intuitive understanding of the animals' silent languages, the same way she'd learned Oliver's. She saw the shadows of displacement in their eyes, the wary hope, the slow unfurling of trust. It resonated deeply. One afternoon, watching a particularly skittish gray tabby finally emerge from hiding to tentatively bat at a feather toy she held, Sarah realized the shift. Her grief for Mark hadn't vanished. It had transformed. It was no longer a crushing weight, but a deep well of empathy. Her experience, the loss, the loneliness, the slow healing, the profound gift of Oliver's trust, it wasn't just her story anymore. It was a lens, a way to see the silent struggles of other displaced souls, both human and animal. The shelter wasn't just volunteer work, it felt like a calling, a way to honor the guardian who had saved her daughter, and in doing so, had helped save her by showing her the quiet, resilient power of trust, the profound language of presence, and the unexpected places where home and purpose could be found. Oliver's final gift wasn't just belonging for himself. It was showing Sarah where she belonged too. Years have a way of softening the sharpest edges. The jagged terror of that muddy March afternoon, the blinding flash of Oliver's leap, the raw metallic scent of fear and blood, they haven't vanished. They're woven into the fabric of their lives now, threads of darkness that make the brighter colors sing more vibrantly. But time and the quiet, persistent rhythm of love and routine has layered them over with something softer, deeper, infinitely more durable. The backyard behind the sturdy wooden fence is a different world. No longer a potential battleground, it's a sanctuary. Lush grass replaced the mud-scarred earth, flower beds. Sarah never had the heart to tend, now burst with color. Cheerful daisies, fragrant lavender, climbing roses that cascade over the fence in a riot of pink and white. A weathered wooden swing hangs from the old maple tree, its rhythmic creak a constant soundtrack to warm afternoons. And often, curled in a patch of dappled sunlight beneath it, or perched with regal indifference on the arm of the porch swing, Sarah occupies. Is Oliver. He's older now. The thick tabby fur holds threads of silver, especially around his muzzle and the familiar scar above his eye. The stiffness in his shoulder returns on damp days, a subtle hitch in his step, a reminder, etched in sinew and bone of the price he paid. He moves with a slower, more deliberate grace, conserving his energy for the things that truly matter. Basking in sunbeams, meticulously grooming his chestnut brown leather collar, the guardian tag worn smooth and gleaming, and keeping a benevolent, half-lidded watch over his domain. His domain, which unequivocally includes Chloe. Chloe is no longer a toddler clinging to Sarah's legs. She's a whirlwind of scraped knees and boundless questions. A girl of 8 with her father's easy grin and her mother's thoughtful eyes. Her hair is still a tangle of blonde, often adorned with wildflowers she insists Oliver helped her pick. He mostly tolerates the proximity. She reads aloud to him, her voice earnest, stumbling over bigger words while he dozes beside her on the rug, one ear flickering in acknowledgement. She draws endless pictures. Oliver as a superhero cat with a cape, Oliver curled beside her in bed, Oliver staring wisely at a butterfly. He is her constant, her confidant, her first fierce experience of unconditional loyalty, the shadow of, the bad doggy is just that now. A shadow, acknowledged, but no longer feared. Partly because Oliver is always there, a living, purring talisman against the dark. Every new subscriber is like a warm cup of tea to my soul. It keeps this little channel going. If you felt something from this story, I'd love for you to stay. Sarah watches them from the kitchen window, her hands submerged in soapy water. The security camera still sits under the porch eave, a silent sentinel. The footage it captured isn't a viral sensation anymore, but it's something far more precious. It's theirs, a private testament stored safely offline. Sarah rarely watches it. She doesn't need to. The truth of that day isn't confined to pixels. It's in the way Oliver still positions himself subtly between Chloe and unfamiliar dogs. On their walks, his posture alert but calm. It's in the deep, resonant purr that vibrates through her lap when she strokes him, a sound that feels like forgiveness, like peace. It's in the absolute trust in Chloe's eyes when she looks at him. Sarah's journey through grief hasn't been linear. Some days, the scent of sawdust on an old shirt, the curve of Chloe's cheek that echoes Mark's smile, can still bring a swift, surprising ache. But the hollow thrumming, the crushing weight of being the only one, it's gone. In its place is a quieter strength, a resilience forged in shared survival and unexpected grace. Her volunteering at the shelter, sparked by Oliver's fund, has become more than a pastime. It's a vocation. She coordinates outreach programs now, matching shy, displaced animals with quiet souls who understand the language of patience. She tells Oliver's story sometimes, not the sensational leap, but the quieter chapters. The silent vigil under the lilac bush, the head pressed against a breaking heart in the hallway, the slow, hard-won trust. She speaks of how healing isn't a destination, but a daily choice, often found in the soft pressure of fur against skin, in the rhythm of a purr, in the simple act of showing up. One warm September evening, the air thick with the scent of late roses and cut grass, Sarah sits on the porch swing. Chloe is chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk, her laughter like scattered bells. Oliver is a warm, solid weight pressed against Sarah's side, his head resting on her thigh, just as he did years ago in the vet's recovery room. His purr is a deep, steady engine of contentment. The guardian tag is cool against her leg. She runs her fingers through the thick fur at his neck, feeling the familiar topography of his body, the slight ridge of the scar above his eye, the smoother patch over his healed shoulder, the sturdy warmth of him. Chloe runs up, breathless, cupping her hands. "Look, Mama! Look, Owlwiver, I caught a light!" She carefully opens her hands a fraction, revealing the frantic, greenish blink trapped within. Oliver lifts his head, his amber eyes reflecting the tiny captive star. He sniffs delicately, then lets out a soft, rumbling murp, as if approving the magic. "Beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah murmurs, "but let's let it go, okay? It needs to find its friends." Chloe nods solemnly. She walks to the edge of the porch, opens her hands wide, and whispers, "Fly! Light!" The firefly zips erratically into the velvet darkness, its tiny beacon joining the constellation emerging in the sky. Chloe climbs onto the swing beside Sarah, snuggling close, her head finding the familiar hollow of her mother's shoulder. Oliver shifts, rearranging himself so he's half on Sarah's lap, half pressed against Chloe's side, a warm bridge connecting them. He resumes his purring, a sound that seems to resonate with the chirping crickets and the soft sigh of the wind in the maple leaves. Sarah wraps an arm around her daughter, her other hand resting on Oliver's back, feeling the rise and fall of his breath, the steady vibration of his purr. She looks out at their small green world, bounded by the strong fence bathed in twilight. The security camera is a small, dark shape under the eave, a silent witness not just to terror past, but to this profound, ordinary peace. This is the meaning that settled, slow as dust motes in a sunbeam, deep into Sarah's bones. It wasn't just about the heroism of a single, blinding moment. It was about the quiet courage that comes after. The courage to heal, to trust again, to open your heart when it's been shattered. It was about the profound truth that family isn't always born. It's forged in shared silences, in unspoken understandings, in the fierce, protective love that can blossom in the unlikeliest of places, like the wary gaze of a scarred tabby under a lilac bush. Oliver didn't just save Chloe from a dog. He saved Sarah from the suffocating isolation of her grief. He taught her that love isn't erased by loss. It transforms, expands, finding new vessels, new languages. He showed her that guardianship isn't about grand gestures, but about the daily, unwavering choice to be present, to offer warmth, to stand watch, to simply be there. The fireflies blink like fallen stars in the deepening blue. Chloe's breathing slows against Sarah's shoulder, drifting towards sleep. Oliver's purr deepens, a lullaby woven from contentment and bone-deep belonging. Sarah closes her eyes, breathing in the scent of her child, her cat, the night blooming, flowers, the safe, solid essence of home. What does it mean to be saved? Is it only the dramatic rescue from physical harm? Or is it the quieter salvation, the hand reaching through the dark silence of despair, the warmth offered against the chill of loneliness, the creature who chooses to stay, stitch by fragile? Stitch helping you mend your broken world? Oliver, the scarred guardian with ancient amber eyes, offered both. His leap was a lightning strike, undeniable. But his staying, his purring warmth on a lap, his silent watch over a sleeping child, his unspoken understanding of a heart's hidden fractures, that was the slow, steady dawn after the storm. That was the true gift, the enduring magic, the quiet light that never goes out. He is more than a hero. He is home. He is family. He is the living proof that sometimes the most profound rescues happen not in the roar of danger, but in the soft, persistent purr of everyday love, patiently weaving its golden threads through the fabric of a broken heart, making it whole again, stitch by beautiful stitch. You stayed till the end. Thank you. If it felt like a soft hug or a warm purr in your heart, subscribing lets me bring you more moments like this.